All right, everybody, we're live. Very cool. So let's wait for some of the people to chime in. All right. So thank you all for tuning in today. I'm Andy, and this is our first ever live Q&A from the studio. And today's guest is a very special person, is one of the world's most respected sound engineers, 3 times Grammy nominee, mixing and mastering engineer, producer. Luca Pretolesi of Studio DMI is known worldwide for his work with a plethora of international artists like Major Lazer, Diplo, David Guetta, Steve Aoki, just to mention a few. And his mixes, his legendary mixes, his signature mixes can be heard worldwide, and literally billions of people have listened to his work. So, without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Luca, the man himself.
Yes. What's going
How
on? Good to see you, Andy.
are you?
What's
So, how are
up?
you? How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Fantastic. It's a good day. I mean, this is actually the first Q&A about Diamond Transient, period. So I'm going to remember this for a long time.
All right. So, well, this is the first Q&A that we are hosting. So, this is
Oh, there we go.
yeah, absolutely. So this is a new thing to us as well. So
Sweet.
we are planning on getting better at this. But of course this is so. Thank you for being part of this experiment, I should say.
We
Um,
are family anyway, and we share everything. That, by the way, next time on the next one, I'm gonna reverse the camera myself, so I'm gonna have kind of like a fancy background, the same that you have. Look at that.
right. Okay. No, thank you. Well, actually, I mean, your studio is a fantastic studio. So,
Thank you.
and one can tell from your shot. So let's break the ice with some very basic questions about
Yeah,
Luca, the person, and some questions about your experience and career. Okay.
for sure.
So the first thing I want to ask you is, so how did you get into mixing and mastering in the first place?
Well, I'm old enough that to tell that I learned on the old way. So when I was extremely young, I talk about 16. So 16 years old, I used to live in on the seaside in Italy. I'm born in a city called Genova. Uh, that from people outside of Italy, like it's maybe not well known, but that's where Christopher Colombo uh,
Yeah.
came from. Well, and I grew up on the Riviera, so I was living between Rapallo, Chiavari, Genova. I was a kid in love for music. I was kind of green on the old music thing. So back then I was like, I want to be a DJ, but I also want to understand. I want to play an instrument also. So I end up 16 years old to move to Milano. And I went to a school that now doesn't exist anymore. It's called Centro Professione Musica. There
All
was
right.
essentially recording, the first proper recording school in Milano. I was the youngest one, and used to be a roommate with an older keyboard player. And I spent almost 3 years doing something that I thought was totally useless. Like I was learning how to clean the tape, how to position the microphone inside of a kick drum. I thought was not really interesting. But then on the second year, I started to dive into synthesizer and sampler. And there was kind of like the point where was the old technology will start to marry the new technology. So I learned from tapes and recording and everything about like the old way, but then start to understand a little bit about sampling and synthesizer. So long story short, during those 3 years, I kind of got my feet wet on pretty much everything, the foundation of recording. Then I didn't apply at all for years, because then I had kind of like early success in my career. I became a producer, an artist. I did a lot of hits in Italy. But then all that type of information and background would like be like in the back of my head, essentially. Like, okay, I know that. One of the biggest compliment that I had as a producer, a young producer, was your music sounds really good. I was enjoying mixing and mastering my own music, probably more than actually produce my own music. It was just like a passion. And I
Right.
always remember that I always, as a dream, like as a young producer, say, okay, what you want to do when you get older? I say, okay, in my second life, I want to dedicate myself full time to mixing and mastering. So I kind of predict the future. And then, yeah, so in my second life, that
Yeah.
was kind of like my projection, and became a full-time mix and master engineer.
All right. So it was a sort of a natural transition
Yeah.
from. Okay. Okay. That's very interesting to know. So, but you have been living in the United States for over 15 years now. Is that correct?
More. So I moved here. I moved in Las Vegas in February 2002. So this means
Wow.
we are about 18 going to 19. Actually, the plan was to move 2001, but then I remember clearly
Right.
being myself and my wife have a meeting and then watch the news, and the Twin Tower went down. And I remember like just like
Yeah.
put ice on me, and we kind of say, okay, let's wait for a second, and we postpone another year. So we moved here like in 2002, when the whole scene, Las Vegas, everything was so different than now.
That's very interesting. Well, but do you think that being in the U.S. Sort of fast tracked your career in a sense? Was that a necessary step that you had to take?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very honest. So, came not from a strategic decision. It was not a strategic decision to move here to kind of like fast track my career as an engineer.
Okay.
It came more. It was very organic. We love it, and then I was a point in my kind of career, my life, in the like late '90s, early 2000s, where I felt I need some excitement, I need to take some risks, do something fun. And then so initially we just love it. We came here for vacation. I did have connection and relationships, but again, it was not strategic. Now looking back, yes, being this country where mixing and mastering, it's actually a step, an essential step on production, from the early stage of rock and roll to hip hop, now dance music, pop music. It's a role. It's something that's being recognized. There is a cultural approach on the recording industry where mixing and mastering has been recognized here before other countries. So I will say yes.
Right.
Being in America, it was easier for a pro engineer to be recognized. There's also another approach. The industry here is really good in a sense of the engineers. If you're able to penetrate the top tiers of the engineers scene, and I was lucky enough to do that, they're really good people where there is not a lot of competition as far as like I think at certain level there's a certain respect and sharing. I create fantastic the relationship and friendship on the industry. So I love it. I think this country, for what I do, it's probably one of the best in the world, I think.
Absolutely. So, and I mean, we have total respect for that because I mean, it's not easy for someone who comes from, for example, Italy in your case, but any other any other country in that regard. Uh, so, were there any frustrating moments at all? Like, some of those situations where you felt sort of discouraged or unsure about the path that you were taking career-wise? Because I know that it's not easy to make a decision just like the one that you made to move
Right.
from a country to another. Basically, you have turned your life upside down to
Sure.
pursue your career. So were
Right.
there
Well, yeah.
difficult
No,
times?
it's a good question. I think in my case, it's a lot to do with my personality. Um, I'm always kind of focused on what I do and very optimistic. So I don't recall to have a really like a down moment, but
Okay.
I recognize that when you take the path that I did in a way that I did with the energy that I did, there's a moment that you need to kind of like be very strong and just move forward. So, for example, I do so many mixes that at the beginning I thought that provide a perfect mix to a client means the client should understand that it's amazing for him. But I learned over time that ultimate who own that master is the artist and the label. So I work and I serve them. So sometimes I felt I had the best mix ever, and the client has a different vision, right? So in that case, how you do that? Well, you understand there's a psychological approach of mixing that I learned over time that allow me to just approach every project with the right mind state.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing your insight on this.
For sure.
Uh, so I in the meantime, I'm seeing some people asking questions. So by
We do
any means,
too, actually, Andy. I'm looking on the question myself. It's cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So guys, you guys, everyone who's tuning right now, make sure that you write your questions in the comments, so we can ask the questions to Luca directly. You have the chance to ask them, to ask him the questions directly in the comments, so to keep the conversation going and to hear from you also. So for example, I have a question here, and then we'll move to some more technical stuff and some more questions for sure. But I have a question from Christian.
Yeah.
So what is Luca's philosophy on using linear phase mode when working with sub-range on Pro Q3? So let's do some technical stuff and some more personal career wise stuff and things like that. So
Yeah. So,
thank you, Christian. Sorry, thank you, Christian, for your question. Luca, the stage is all yours.
well, so the linear phase. So there is one thing I want to share with everyone. Try to don't go crazy and put technical before feelings, because yes, for example, approach linear phase EQ. Good question, and I do use linear phase EQ on mastering. Certain other brand, I only use linear phase EQ because I feel that that's a way to try to avoid phase shifting and other things that we know about linear phase EQ. But what is the benefit, for example, when I use a diamond color EQ or any type of Acoustica plugin? Is it that I have, in my case, less option, and I really test what kind of result I'm getting to use that type of EQ. For example, we're not talking today about the color EQ, but one of the secrets of the color EQ is the limitation of option. And so one thing that I love, and that's why for me being involved with you guys on development plugin, it's a way to kind of like do what makes sense also for me as an engineer. And I'm so glad this actually being projected to everyone. That is limitation is actually an additional value when you can just maximize your creativity and minimize the number of action that you do with a plugin to achieve a certain result. The best example that I got from a good friend Dave Pensato, it's that I make myself is, if I drive a car, right, and the car has a million different options that I can push to improve my experience, versus an automatic great drive car that I push and then I just drive and I enjoy the view and just like enjoy the ride instead of going crazy to understand what I'm doing. I mean, obviously, I want to choose something that make benefit the process, having fun, be fast. So with the plugin, it's the same. I want to get faster to the point that I'm looking for to get, and that's all about.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I think that this brings us to the Diamond Transient
Yes,
stuff.
sir.
Before that, there's a nice question that just popped up, which comes from Solaris, if I'm reading that correctly. What was So let's try to make, okay. So what was your approach to getting new clients when you started? mixing and mastering professionally? Because actually, it was one of the questions that I prepared for you. So,
It's awesome. It's a good question.
and this is indeed a very good question. So, thank you, Slaris, for
Yeah,
this. So, Luca,
yeah, yeah. So you want to, at one point, even in an early stage of your career, you want to leverage something that you have going on. So if you think about it, a lot of engineers, they focus at the beginning on the wrong spot. So how much I'm going to charge, how much I'm going to charge you. Well, think about it. Don't charge. Use that as a marketing investment. So if you go to a client or a startup engineer and say, "Look, I'll be cheap with you. I'll only charge you that amount. I'll only charge you like $100 to mix your song." Tell me, is not a better look to say, "Look, I will love working with you. I'm inspired by your music. Sending your music. Don't worry about money." That don't worry about money, you just shift from, "Oh, you try to make something from this. You're actually cheap. Why are you so cheap?" To say, "No, but don't talk about money. Let's work on music together." That will
right,
create a precedent that you create something together, that if that goes well, then you're going to leverage that work with another work. Now, on the second work, thanks to the success of the first work, you can charge. So what I'm saying is, think about it like you are building, you have an initial, like I say, you have an initial a beginning into the scene. You need to buy in. And the way to do it is, don't think about money. Make as an investment yourself, and do a lot of content work. And that's happening with me here in the States. Something that break the ice was working with Steve Aoki on the early stage when Steve, it went from a regional decent name to an international name. I was there and I was helping to get his music sound better. And then when he blew up, like by default, I had hits. And then when I had hits, other producer came to me because I had hits with Steve. And
right.
then when Diplo came to me, then I work with him. And then I have other came to me because I work with Diplo. So it's kind of like it's a snowball effect. Money
Right.
will come.
That's very interesting. So thank you for the answer. Okay, so I would before taking in more questions, because I'm seeing many questions that are popping up that are very interesting. But let's speak about our latest co-creation for a second.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
the the Diamond Transient. So because you were mentioning the importance of workflow,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about the idea behind the Diamond Transient.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Andy, let me take the opportunity for me during this portion of our conversation also to maybe answer other question that I'm getting DM on my Instagram. It's like a week of bombarding. I'm getting so many
I,
questions. So
I can only imagine.
yeah, I
All right,
might I might answer a question that we don't see pop up right now on the live, but just because I wrote some notes on multiple questions. So about your
right.
question, why this unit? Like
So,
every product that we did in the past together, it's always been triggered by something that physically I use here at the studio. There was a story of the color EQ. That was inspired by two pieces of unit on my desk, and we combine into one, and we make something unique. Same story with Lyft. So the Diamond Transient, yes, it's been inspired by the DBX 3BX as a starting point. But I remember the first time that me and Giancarlo we sit in this room, and I kind of show my workflow. Now it's like almost 2 years ago, um, about using the 3BX in combination with an expounder, which is a unit not very popular. That from that unit, I used to use only this dynamic filter, and that became my thing on drums for a very long time. What I did a little bit strategically, I didn't share much about on the analog stage, just because I was, first of all, I was using those two units in a not traditional way. So the 3BX is meant to be a restoration unit for hi-fi use. They did in
okay,
the 70s, then the 80s for vinyl. In my use, it was completely different. It was about to use that to create expansion on drums, and then use also mastering in combination with expounder was something unique to say, I don't want to throw people off. We keep under the radar for a while, but that was inspired by that. Knowing the limitation of the unit, my dream was to create a plugin that the 3BX was only the starting point, scratch the surface on expansion, but then adding so many things that made today the plugin not even way superior than the hardware. It's different. It just took the essential visual and like interface and a little bit about the concept, but we kind of did like a 2.0. They're just another level. So the idea, first of all, I'm obsessed with transient reshaping and expansion forever.
right.
And I went through using different brand, different plugin for a long time, combination of hardware, but I never had a chance to get something like the Diamond Transient where I don't want to look, I would just want to feel. I want to have like specific 3 bands that have a clear makeup gain. I just want to get so quick to the result. And I'm pleased and happy about the result. I'm so happy.
That's so great to hear. So basically, if you had to answer this question, so what problem does it solve in the studio? Like if you had to say, look, this is why you should care about this product. Why would you use it in the first place? Like maybe you can give us, I don't know, maybe 3 tips to use it.
Don't, in my case as a user, now that I'm using this, right? Don't think this as a multi-channel tool. It's not an EQ, a compressor that you put on 32 channel. It's pointless. The main purpose of this for me is to use on drum bus and stereo bus, or drum bus only, and when you go back to mastering, on mastering. The best way of using the Diamond Transient is mix into the Diamond Transient. So you put on the early stage of your mix, and you treat your entire drum, creating expansion and compression. In my case, I like to keep the mid-range in front. So I like to compress the mid-range and do a little bit of gain staging with the makeup gain. I bring the mid-range up front, and I click bypass first on the low frequency, on the high frequency. So bypass those two, focus on the mid-range, get the mid-range, compress. Then I open the top, I open the bottom, and I do the opposite. I do expansion. So what I'm getting essentially is movement on the drums, on the bottom end, on the top end, and very firm on the mid-range. When I do that at the beginning of my mix, now I almost like bypass the unit, bypass the interface. I don't want to see anymore. I'm done. Then I mix through that. The cool thing is when I start to push a snare or like a clap or a tom into the transient, the transient will behave and will give you almost like a translation that is different. Because what it does, it's taking all the element on the drums, for example, and it just make a glue and move together. If you do the same without, you do a traditional mixing. With, it's just a different approach. It's a lot of fun. Now, we have options that we didn't have on the hardware, of course, which is the attack shape, the dynamic model, the way attack release works. And that's a lot to do based on BPM of the tracks or style or stylistic approach. Down tempo track, I find myself to do very relaxed attack and release, kind of medium slow. If I go snappy house music, I do medium attack and very fast release. So, but then over time, will be like a muscle memory, like it'll be like a second nature work with the unit.
That's a nice way to define it, for sure. So, speaking of techniques, I have a question from Roman X. This is a very interesting one, I guess. And let's bring this up. Let's show this. So, should I process bass and kick with transients as a group, or best to keep them separate? Thank you, Roman, for your question. I think this is a nice question.
It's a nice question. In my case, I have a kind of template set up. In my case, is kick, low percussion, high percussion into the drum bass. Let me explain the difference. Sure. When I say low percussion, high percussion, I divide about 1 kilohertz down drum related information, high percussion 1 kHz or up. So give an idea, everything related to tom, clap, rim shot, snare, loops, that's low percussion for my workflow. High percussion, open, close hi-hats, ride, crash, cymbal, tambourine. So when I divide those two groups, if I have 10 stems going through or 200 stems going through, I always kind of divide my bussing system, whatever, my kick drum, my low percussion, my high percussion. And then I grab all those with my drum bus. Now,
Okay.
in that way, when I put the transient on my drum bus, I kind of massage and treat everything. Now, if I feel that my high percussion is not bright enough, what I do sometimes, I put like a diamond colored cue just on the high percussion, and I do like a 50K shelf. When I bring some like sparkle on the top, that will
Right.
by default go to the diamond transient and give you the sense of feeling a movement on the top. If I feel that my low percussion needs something snappier, I might add another diamond transient just on the low percussion to bring some transient out on the low percussion. So when you kind of see your drum divide on the three different groups, that you can do is just go on a kick drum, say, well, I just want to bring the kick drum a little bit up into the drum, so I just push the level up. Or I feel the kick drum is getting a little boomy after everything, I can EQ my kick drum, always in relationship and translated by my drum bus. So that's kind of like my workflow as far as the drums. And I do the same for synth. I do the same synth low, synth high. So I have the same techniques across the mix, but specifically on drums where the diamond transit really shine, I recommend to do that. To kind of like divide your drums in three different groups. And then treat for what the song really needs.
All right, that's very interesting. So thank you, Roman, for your question. I have another question from Baby F. Let's bring this up. So how do you use parallel processing without having phase issues? Luca Orgoglio Italiano. All right, thank you.
L'orgoglio italiano, that's what really matter. That's a great question. That's a great question. So I'm usually worried about phase shifting when I use very complex information. So if I do a full mastering and then I treat my entire master, I'm really worried because the phase shift happening, especially between mid and side, I'm worried about a crossover point between all those nice piano, organ, and synth going into reverb. So I'm worried about that. To be honest, I'm less worried on drums. That's why I'm get more aggressive on treating my drums with my dread and white knob on the diamond transient, because I don't feel the problem much, at least on acoustical plugin.
All right. So thank you. So I have another question, which is interesting. You guys are bringing up very interesting questions today. So I'm very glad that you're dropping them in the comments. So I have this question from Arve. Sorry, Arve, if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Let's bring this up. Arve's question: is it possible for you to get the loudness and transient behavior you want with only software clippers, no analog clipping whatsoever? I think it's an interesting question.
100% yes. That's a question that I got a lot. Actually, it was one in the list of questions that I got on my DM that I was going to answer anyway. So you're not getting louder for analog clipping, you're getting different tone and color. And if you clip your converter versus like an analog limiter, you get different tones. So it's more a choice. Now, lately, in the past, at least 3 to 4 years, in the box clipping is a winner, because now you can do things that you absolutely cannot do on the analog domain. You can automate your clipper. How you can do that on analog clipper? Usually what I do, for example, if I use lift and I feel that I want to clip on purpose my chorus, or if it's a dance music track, we call drop.
All right. That's interesting. You clip your chorus.
I just automate and I make snap. When I hit the chorus, I do maybe 1 to 2 dB clipping. When I go back into the verse, I just put the clipper down, so I let the song breathe. So give like dynamic kind of like dynamic flow through the song, automating the clipper. So clipper is also, there's an stylistic approach about clipping on drums, for example, that you can do if you use the clip set you have on the LP3X on the Diamond Transient. You're gonna feel what I mean. Is if you want to do a trap song when on purpose, you want to just put like a ceiling and make everything sounds very tight and borderline distorted. That's a stylistic approach. You should definitely do it if you feel the song need that, almost as a production tools. If you go mastering for loudness, you can do in a more sophisticated way. You can do multi-stage clipping where you clip first, kind of like you take away the peaks and the valley. So that's called crest factor. So the average level, the peak, whatever is there is the crest factor. If I'm able to make the crest factor instead of being like this, this means I can lift the entire track up. If I do in a transparent way, you get a track louder without feeling that you're losing or changing the dynamic response or the envelope of the track. You're just pulling up. Now, don't stress your plugin, whatever, if it's like a Lift or any other brand, to have one single plugin do everything, and don't pretend that with 10 dB or reduction will sounds clean and loud. You need to be very strategic, which is multi-stage clipping. Like if you have stems, do a little bit of clipping everywhere, shave 1 dB here, 1 dB there. In that way, when you get into your master, you only have less to work instead of like drag everything there and pretend one limiter will do everything. But back to the question about the in the box versus analog, absolutely, there's no doubt that plugin clipping, it's absolutely in part with analog clipping, actually with more flexibility.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Arby, for your question. I have a nice question from Richard Cook. Sorry, Richard, if I misspelled your name or mispronounced your name. So we start to take some of the questions from our Facebook viewers as well. So hey, Luca, I'm a big fan of your work. The Diamond Transient really highlights your thought process and workflow.
Thank you.
But how did you get there? I would like to hear your opinion on creating your own style, like you did, versus watching tutorial and copying your favorite engineers.
Well, in my case, I'm watching tutorial and I take and share with other engineers like everybody else. Like the way, so I'm also involved a lot in educational, I do webinars and workshops. And to me, it's just like I'm serving a purpose. So I keep sharing what I'm learning and I'm looking forward to learn again from others. We are in an industry where what we do, it's not a job. It's just like a passion. If when you're a fan of cars, right? And then you kind of like, you just watch, learn, apply. We're a fan of everything. We are a fan of what we do. So in my case, I'm sharing what works for me, what I feel that it get me excited and give me a result. And then when I talk with other engineers, I'm learning a little bit here, a little bit there, and I apply it and I make my own. So what I recommend to do is to take and make your own. So if you watch a tutorial, you might be inspired by, say, oh, wow, okay, I want to try that technique and just bend that techniques and make my own and apply to my workflow.
Right.
I think also I'm a fan of producers. They're able to detach themselves when they're mixing, when we talk about mixing. So mixing and mastering, there are stages. One of the biggest mistakes that I see, people start to mix too soon. You start writing, and you start to do a little bit of production, and you want to mix the song entirely when the song is not mature enough to be mixed. So one of the reasons why there's people like myself or other engineers that we do this for a living is because there's a lot of producer. They're also maybe skills engineer, but because they're so absorbed by production that when you listen your own song 550 times, you're not objective. Your objectivity is gone. So now pass to another person like myself, allow you to kind of like get a fresh perspective and just take over and keep going. So I recommend, if you want to get better mixing, do it in a separate stage. Don't try to mix when you're still writing. Finish your song, sleep, make the song sleep for 2, 3 days. Go back and think as a mixer engineer.
Well, this is a very nice answer to this question. Thank you, Richard, for the question. Thank you, Luca, for your precious golden knowledge. All right, I have a question, which I think is interesting, from Amir. Amir, let's bring up the question from Amir. That one, yes, thank you. So, Amir, by using a limiter on every track, am I distorting my master and its transient? So I think I think if I'm getting this correctly, Amir, is that by using a limiter on each track, am I ruining my sound? Am I doing something wrong if I want to use a limiter on each track?
That's a great question. I think it's based on the content. So absolutely, you don't want to put a limiter into a like pretty nice pad of strings. You don't want to do that, right? So limiter
Right.
or clipper, they're more meant to treat transient. They're coming through in a way they're under control. They're not under control yet. So you want to kind of control your transient. If we think like no program material, it's like an actual real drum. Well, you want to stay away a little bit for limiting. You want to more for clipping if you want to retain the nice transient of your drums, but you want to get some perceived loudness. So if you're cutting a little bit the peaks of your drums, you can push it up a little bit. If you use a limiter, it's a compressor. Will change the envelope of your drum. So be strategic. When you talk about spread, clipping, limiting in different buses, for example, do it in a way that makes sense. One can be a bass note that when it move in a certain bass frequency, that part is taking so much headroom that maybe do a little bit of limiting on a certain area. Well, you're able to control dynamically the even lower notes will not take too much headroom, which is one of the biggest problems right now. A lot of trap music does 808s. The 808, which is, if we can talk about 808s, it's a drum machine. But here in the States, we call 808 the sine wave of the kick. So the 808, the kick, when it goes on a C note on the first octave, that C note will kill so much headroom because now you're not going to hear well, but your DAW will actually hear it, and then that will create distortion. So in that case, I recommend multiband. If you go, for example, for the transient, because today we are talking about the diamond transient, take the lower band of the transient, put on compression mode. This means you take the trim, you go minus 20, no thirds plus. Plus is expansion. You go minus. You make just when they hit the lower note to do a little bit of compression. That will, and then you gain staging where you push your low frequency up a little bit. That way you're compensating, but the compressor will pull down. So in general, think about it, about the scope of the mix and where you can use limiting to kind of bring things that stick out too much and control it, and have the stereo bus final limiter to make him do less work doing that way.
And speaking of stereo bus and tube bus, I have one question that's very interesting from your Shuff Mix. Hi, Luca. Could you please tell your vision? Exactly. That's why let's bring this up so everyone can read that. Okay. Hi, Luca. Could you please tell your vision on using Diamond Transient and lift after it for a tube bus?
Yeah. So if you...
sorry, Luca. And then he brings up a second part of the question.
Yeah.
No, I don't think this is one. This is the one below. Does lift... Let's hide this. Let's hide this. Let's remove this. Exactly. Mm. So does lift work harder in the situation, or you sort of look for a more relaxed setting on it, corresponding, depending on what transient is doing? So what is your take on that?
Great question. So the clip set, the clipper that we have on Diamond Transient works really well as a clipper. And you have 3 mode. One is more hard clipping, one is more soft clipping, one kind of in the middle. So if you have the option, the opportunity to also use lift will give you even more opportunities. So think about it this way. If you put on a 2 bus, if you're not looking to if you're looking to master the song later, use clipping just to kind of keep the song together. Don't try to get to minus, I don't know, 5 RMS from the mixing stage. Leave some headroom, but the clipping will help you kind of to keep the song together. So if you have both, I would say use the clip set and give a tiny bit of clipping internally or transient to do less job on lift. So on lift, now you have two options. One, you can set an additional clipper, but because lift give you also an opportunity to have a shelf, you can do a little bit of low shelf, high shelf into the clipper. That's something very unique on lift because you can set up a clipper and change a little bit the shape of the clipping based on those two shelf that we have into lift. So you can combine a little bit of clipping on the transient, go into lift, do another stage of clipping, maybe different. Maybe you can try the 3 on lift and try 1 on transient. So you have a little bit of hard clipping first, you'll be a soft clipping later, and they use a little bit of the high shelf, a low shelf to trigger. One thing the lift does so well is that if you do the way I use the clipper to kind of exaggerate, make it sound distorted, do a step back, find like a sweet spot, and then use the 2 shelf to give a little bit of bump, a little bit of tone. You're going to feel the clipper to behave in a certain way that's really, really nice. So the combination really works. But please, if you're going to master later, don't kill all the dynamics. Leave a little bit for mastering.
All right. Now that's a very interesting question. Thank you, Aliek, for your question. So I have a question because we have received in the past few days a few questions that that I think everyone wants answered, and that is, what's your system? So what are you using as main DAW, and on what computer, and what are your specs?
Right. So I'm on Studio One now for about 4 years, and I was on Logic for 17. So I switched from Logic to Studio One. So in Studio One is not the most CPU friendly DAW with any other brand. So it's not the most. But what I learned over time, and I was reading a lot of those questions and concern about CPU too myself. I'm using, by the way, I use an iMac Pro, a decent iMac. It's not the top of the line, but it's decent. I can check right now, so I can give some spec. It's like 2017 3.2 with 64 gigabyte RAM. It's okay. I mean, it's not the $50,000 iMac Pro brand new, but it's all right.
All right.
The way I'm getting good result is use what you really need. You don't need to put 35 plugins across the mix and then decide later if you need it or not. Use it when you need it. So why you want to kind of overload your DAW with too many plugins, or why you want to create a chain with like 12 different plugins in serial in one single channel, when with one plugin you can achieve the same. One answer about the Diamond Transient is like, yes, it's a CPU incentive because there's a lot going on under, the plugin. But think about it. That can be, it's an EQ and a transient. So it's dynamic EQ in one unit. Use kind of like the gain stage knobs at the bottom to kind of EQ what you're trying to do. And then not necessarily you need another EQ after. So another one is, do you really need to pre-process everything that you've been processed already during the production? I'm not sure. It's not better to just use less plugin strategically. I'm a big fan of treating a lot of groups, a lot of information together. Sometimes you get the magic when you take your synth, you have a piano with the pads, with little strings, and you EQ the entire group instead of going and solo each individual sound and try to reinvent the mix. So think about it to optimize your workflow first. You'll be surprised that a lot of plugins you're using everywhere, they're not necessary if you're using on the proper place in the mix.
That's golden knowledge right there, guys. So thank you very much for this. I have a question for you, and then I'll have room for one more question from our viewers. So my question for you is, I remember in one of your past interviews, you were discussing about stereo processing. Now,
Yeah.
I really liked the analogy that you created when you spoke about the stereo processing, that you were trying to recreate the stereo image like as if it was a tree,
A
right?
tree.
Shape
Exactly.
like a tree, shape the
Yeah.
stereo like. Can you please tell us a little bit more
Let
about
me
your approach?
expand a little bit more. So when I think about the mid and side or the stereo information or the sum and difference, whatever you want to call it, I
Right,
think as a tree. So the tree, it's very narrow. So you have the base, which is mono. So the base of the tree, which is ironically is the base of the music, or base. So it's mono. And then you have this effects where open up the side, so open up the tree, and I love to open up the side between the going 300 to 1K. If you open up the side there, you get the warmth, you get like the pads, the piano, the low end information of your reverbs, all that will kind of like grab you. And because you are mono before that, the effect of going mono and open up the side, it's very, you carry an impact. Typical arrangement, you have the intro of the song with few instrument, the sounds kind of mono, and then when I open up the chords, if you open up the side, you got this tree effect. So go mono, open up the side. Now, if you try to make everything super wide, you keep everything wide like this, that tree is going to look weird. It's going so
right, right,
then what's going to happen when you go all the way super wide everywhere, after 30 seconds doesn't feel wide anymore. So
right,
because it's wide. So what I do, open the bottom of the tree, then start to close it and start to go a little bit mono where those instruments they have transient, they need to kind of just hit you in the face. So when you have the snare, you have kind of the notes, the transient of the notes of the piano, or you have like a lead, a moog lead, that will hit you in the face there. So I don't want to get super crazy. So then depends on the tree. Some trees they start to close sooner, and then everything is related to the open and close hats, the like the crash, all that will sound in your face on the top.
right,
Other trees, they're a little bit different. What they do, they go like this, they close, they might open again a little bit, and then they close again. So that's kind of like the analogy that about the tree effect, to start
right.
mono, open up, close.
But I think it's very interesting when it's a very, I mean, creating analogies helps, ideas getting fixed in your brain somehow. So I think this is one
And
piece of
based
advice.
on also something, Andy, based on the speakers you have on your back on your screen right now, or the speaker I have in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah,
So think about this. You have beautiful speakers, and all the speakers they have a very small tweeter, like the eye frequency need to translate in those little too small little thing. If you feed those little things with too much side information and too much distortion, compression, they'll they're gonna have a really hard time to translate. And the typical effect you are getting is, oh, this song is just like it's just fatiguing, just like this song is
right,
just piercing my ears. Now,
right,
if you go opposite, you go to have those little things, Twitter, to give a little bit expansion and feel no over compress. You don't feed with too much side information. That will
right,
sound cleaner. Now, if you go the same concept at the bottom, when you have a sub on the stage of a festival or on your studio or in the club, and you feed that sub with a lot of side information, the sub is going to go crazy. You're going to get a cancellation. You're going to get a fighting going on because the sub is not meant to translate side information well. So that's the point to make it mono at the bottom and mono again when you on the top of the tree. And
right,
the same way I think about expansion at the bottom, expansion at the top, it's for the same purpose. If I send a super compressed signal on my sub, The sub, what we're gonna do? Will stick. We'll just move and stick. If I give a pleasant expansion, we'll move. I hope
Right.
that makes sense.
Well, it does, at least to me, but I'm sure that it makes sense to everyone here. So I have a question from Sound Signals. Yes,
Yeah.
I'll bring this. Hi, Luca. When programming bass, some notes are louder than others because of where they are in the frequency range. So how
Yeah.
do you get the bass to sound consistent in terms of volume?
I mentioned a little bit before about multiband compression. Another
Right.
way is, to me, if you have the luxury to have stems, so you can I visually see the waveform, just like change the shape on different notes. It's time consuming, but to put less stress on compressor or multiband, I physically cut the louder notes. They usually happen on the first octave, on the C, on the C, on the D. So on the lower, the 40, the 30, the 38, the 40 hertz, the 42, I cut those and I just lower maybe 1 or 2 dB to match the other one. Now, what I do to kind of like make everything kind of even, I use a little bit of saturation or a nice preamp of any unit that you might like. You can take the preamp of the Cutlery Cube, or you take the preamp of your favorite plugin that you like. The preamp will kind of like glue things together because the preamp is creating harmonics. Those harmonics will fill the gap. Filling the gap will make kind of sounds even. So if you do a little bit of cutting those notes, lower the notes, and then a little bit of maybe a little bit of multiband compression to just control those notes, then a little bit of saturation will really help to make, especially cut through small devices, like a phone or a laptop computer, especially what happening on the second octave or the third octave. You want to make sure that you'll be able to bring what's happening on the lower octave into the second and the third. And that second harmonic, that odds and even harmonic will help to carry, into the other octaves.
That's very interesting. Well, thank you. I know that I said that I had room just for one question, and that was it. But
Let's keep
there's
going.
another. Yeah. I mean, I could keep going for
Yeah.
for the rest of the day.
And if you
But
don't mind, Andy, before we close, I would like to add really quick, answer myself those 3 or 4 questions. I'll be very quick that I'm getting bombarded on my DM.
absolutely, yeah, the
And
stage is all yours.
and we cover already like a lot of those. So there's only like a few. Let's go in with
Yes,
you. And
because
then,
of course you're being asked. Of course, I know what we have been asked, but of course, if you're being asked
yeah.
questions that you feel you want to answer right now, this is the perfect place, and we are all ears.
Awesome. So I have a one specific question that I'm getting a lot right now is
Okay.
how you go about BPM on your track and how you set your attack and release on the transient if you have like an 85 BPM song or 128 BPM song.
Right.
Well, the purpose of this plugin, it's the opposite of any other technical transient plugin from other companies. It's meant to be a feeling thing. My best mixers, they're coming from me using sometimes analog gear, not because it sounds better, because it's forgiving. And when I change compression on an analog compressor in front of me, when I feel that it's giving me what I want, I'm stopped and I'm married to that decision. So the answer is don't look numbers. When you go for transient, just go by feeling. When you feel the groove is moving the way you want, that's the right spot. There's no right or wrong. So don't go crazy on calculation or like millisecond on attack time. And that question carry into the attack shape and dynamic model. Overall, I'll give you some indication. If I go for mastering only, I want to use as a leveler and just bring up and get louder without changing too much the transient response. I go with dynamic model 5 in attack shape 4, and then the transient will behave almost like a leveler where things hit instead of snap, just like control. So it's very effective, especially on down tempo music. If you go on drums like kick and snare and tom, go on all the way around. Dynamic model 1, attack shape 0, and you get super snappy. Think about like you're diving into a piece of gear from the 70s, the 80s with the option of today, which is automation, saving, and be able to recall, use multiple unit. But don't try to make a unit that's meant to be a feeling and like a vibey plugin in a super technical millisecond, microsecond. I don't think that's the right mindset.
That's absolutely super interesting, because I know that for a fact that especially maybe newbies or
Mhm.
beginners, they tend to maybe give numbers and figures maybe a little too much of an importance,
Yeah.
maybe. So they fear that if they don't pick up a certain setting, they're doing something wrong,
No.
whereas that's not the case. That's
Uh,
that's
Andy, I'll need to share with you something that I do a lot, and that's crazy how things are different when you look, when you don't look. So, and
okay.
recommend you guys to try that. So, if you do something, let's say you want to get on the transient the right amount of high frequency after you do some expansion, you take the mouse, you put on the level, and you start to push level up. And you move your eyes out of the screen, and the moment that you move your eye out of the screen, you keep move your mouse, then you're gonna trust 100% your feelings, not your eyes. So when you do that, you do it, and then you watch what you did. You pull to zero, and you do again one more time. You're gonna find yourself almost going always on the same spot, and that's what you're feeling tell you. That's what you feel. That's what you're doing. If you go for like any other EQ that you have a nice, crazy, cool, nice analyzer, then every time you touch, tell you that you're going up 5 dB, and then you get scared. You say, "I'm not meant to push 5 dB." Why not? You meant to do what you want to do. So I think with our tools, regardless if it's like a transient or if it's like the color EQ or lift or any other plugin, we want to feel before we look, because if we look, we're going to get a limitation of what we feel, we perceive based on what we see, that it's maybe too much or it's not much enough. So if you do it again, start with the mouse, move your eyes just really quick, like a feet from the screen, do it and go back, and that's going to be the decision you want to trust.
Absolutely. So it's a feel thing.
It's a
So
feel thing.
basically, we're getting used to mixing too much with your with our eyes and not our
Yeah,
ears, basically. So
exactly right. Yeah.
we don't have to be shy about just turning
Oh,
a knob all the way up or down, if that makes sense for the song.
exactly right. Yeah.
All right. So that's very interesting. So I have one last question. That's of course that you mentioned before, and but I think it's worth repeating, because many people are asking this, and we're receiving this question a lot in private messages as well. So from Radu, thank you very much for your question, Radu. So how do you balance your frequencies? Let's speak in a broad sense, okay? So low, mid high, etc. So how do you know when enough is enough or it needs to be pushed more? So again, I think it relates to the feel thing that you just mentioned,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so how do you picture your frequencies in your mind?
Okay. I strongly recommend to do good use of reference tracks. So if you are mixing your own music and you had success, you create kind of like a benchmark. You create like a reference track on one of your previous song. You're working on an album. You want to keep the album cohesive, put together. So you want to retain a certain aesthetic of your mix where, let's say, drums, you like the way you bring the high frequency on the drums, or you like the way your mid-range translate, and you have success on one song, you want to retain your personality across the album,
Right.
use a reference track. And if you do, please do it matching the gain, because that's a key element. When it sounds louder, feels is better, it feels like brighter, it feels no, just make sure you're do level matching and use reference tracks. For my work, when I work with new client, I find myself that a way to communicate with them about, hey, how much mid range we want, how much low end, how much top end. The best way to ask this question to them is send me reference tracks and tell me why you like. oh, Luca, I love this, like, I don't know, culinary song. There's a really bright high frequency. I love that. And I love this track. There's like a nice kick drum. I start to get it, start to read like what they tried from the music that I'm listening, and then keep those reference as a point of reference for my mixes. So the low mid, the high mid, it's just gonna be like a result of getting a reference point from another track, or things happen a lot with me. I create my own reference. So a lot of people come to me for a specific song that I mixed in the past. So if it's a reggaeton track, they say, hey, what you did in Miente, it's so cool. Can you please kind of approach my mix kind of the way you work on that song? That's come natural to me, but I'll keep the Miente as a reference. If I do the same with other tracks, I create my own reference folder and I pull my reference. So reference tracks is really helpful, especially if you work with new plugins or if you work with like a room that you don't trust 100%. It's a good way to kind of like make sure that you're taking a certain approach.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. So I have the last question that I want to ask you before saying goodbye to everyone.
Yeah,
And I think this is a pretty a difficult question to answer, but let's try nevertheless. Okay.
let's try
So
that.
okay. So what is the true secret of your success, Luca?
Oh, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to answer. You're probably right. Uh, well, I think first of all, probably the fact that I don't feel that first of all there's any secret. I don't feel they have any success. I think that what's happening, it's the result of just my passion being amplified 1,000%. So what I do is my hobby, my job, my passion. It's a full dedication, uh, and it's
Fantastic.
come so natural that I mean, unfortunate that translate as a success, but it's not coming from a place to try to have success. I try to do the best to give me joy, and I enjoy the process, which is something very important. Even more, the long term result is just having fun and love what you do, and eventually you're gonna get a success. If you do or if you don't, that really matter, because if you enjoy the process, you really enjoy life. So I think as a result. But thanks for the question. Appreciate
So,
it.
so basically, guys, find your passion and stick to it.
Yeah,
Right.
stick to that. Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Luca, for hanging out with us today, and thank you everyone who tuned in for this Q&A session. It was our first session. There will be more coming, and stay tuned because there is more coming from Acustica and Studio DMI as well. Right?
Love it. Andy, it was amazing. Thanks for everyone for the fantastic question. I'm sure this answered a lot of those questions that we kind of had in the first couple of weeks. So I'm excited. Who knows? Maybe next time I'll be with you in the room in Italy. We'll see. I hope
Well, let's
so.
hope. Let's hope the situation gets better. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon.